brief recap. Talk about what we talked about last time in pre-qualifying and why that is so critical to be able to transition from that into this stage here that we're heading into.
Right. As we mentioned before on the first tape that we did, qualifying is simply gaining trust from the driver, gaining the information that we need to know in order for us to be able to help the driver. There's no sense sitting there talking to a driver about running over the road for XYZ company for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 weeks at a time when he's calling up wanting to know about a regional run where he's home every weekend. And if we don't possibly qualify the driver to begin with, that's what can happen to us. And of course the driver loses all trust. So as we mentioned before, qualifying is not being nosy. Qualifying is not, trying to gain information with the driver just to have it. It's there to help the driver. And the driver feels good about you, and he feels comfortable with what you're doing if you do it properly and you ask all the qualifying questions.
Right. And you did a great, I love the picture you used of the cake and just how critical it is to have all the elements present to get the end result, what you're looking for. You want the cake to taste a certain way, to look a certain way, and you talked about that, and the fact that if one of them's missing, you don't have the same cake.
That's right. Exactly, because as we said, it takes 4 things to make this cake that we want to make, and all 4 steps are equally as important as the other. You cannot lay down on one of the steps, ever at any time. Just like qualifying, we got to go through all the questions, not some of them.
Yeah.
Not even when we think that maybe halfway through it, we know.
Right.
Because of what this guy said. Well, what don't you like about your job you got right now, Mr. Driver?
Right.
Well, I'm out 8 weeks at a time. Bingo. We think we got all the answers. Well, no, we don't. We just have one answer. And the second step, that we're going to talk about today, giving a proper presentation is, again, which step's the most important? Well, I said last week proper qualifying is, and I'll still stick up to that.
Yeah.
But you could also argue that a proper presentation may be the most important, because just like we were talking about a minute ago before you start turning the tape on, if we get down to the end and the guy says to you, "What do I need to do now?"
Yeah.
Sounds to me like you did all 4 steps.
That's right.
And if you get down at the end of this deal and the driver says, well, how much do I stay out?
Mm-hmm.
Guess what? You didn't do all 4 steps, did you?
No.
That's why, what we're fixing to talk about is so vitally important.
Yeah, and real quickly, again, this is something we were just talking about a minute ago, but these first 2 stages are so critical because the confidence and trust level that the driver has in you is building until it reaches a point. If you've done these first 2 correctly, it's like you said, the third phase is actually the easiest one. The closing is the easiest because the driver has, in effect, closed himself.
Yeah, and you know what? I want to give you a great example of that.
Yeah.
And I mean that sincerely. It just happened to me.
Okay.
And you know how good I am at computers.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
So I walked into Best Buy.
Uh-huh.
I went down to Houston this weekend to see my grandkids.
Right.
Okay? I went into Best Buy because I wanted a webcam.
Uh-huh.
I wanted a webcam for us. I wanted a webcam for them, so we could log on to our computer and we could see the grandkids as we talk to them.
Sure.
On the phone and see them on the computer.
Uh-huh.
Okay? Now, other than that, that's all I know about a webcam.
Right.
I went into Best Buy, and this young lady walked up to me that was probably 19, 20 years old. I don't know how, 20, 21, something like that.
Uh-huh.
Okay? And my wife was with me, Christy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now, fortunately, she knows a lot more about computers than I do.
Right.
But this young lady came up and said, "What can I show you?"
Yeah.
And we said, "We want to look at webcams." Now, other than that, even Christy knowing a lot about computers, we've never had a webcam. So
Right.
she knows nothing about a webcam.
Sure.
Okay? This young lady starts asking questions. What do you want with it? What are you going to do with it? What's it for?
Yeah.
What's this? What's that? I mean, she started asking about 8 or 9 or 10 different questions.
Right.
And you know what? Not one time did I ever think she was intruding in my privacy.
Right.
She was qualifying me, what she was doing.
Right.
Without me even knowing it.
Right. She was probably even asking questions that you didn't think about. And
there's no way, because I don't know. If you don't know, how do you know? You don't even know what you're asking about.
Yeah.
Other than a webcam, that's all I know about it.
Yeah.
Point being, she asked me these great questions. We explained to her what we wanted it for. Mm-hmm. She answered everything about it and why the $150 one was no better than this whatever the one we bought is sitting over there, Microsoft webcam for $70.
Yeah.
You ain't gonna get nothing for 150. You ain't gonna get for the 70s. The way she put it. Here's why. And she explained it. Now she's giving a proper presentation, didn't she?
Yes, she
yeah.
did.
Here's how it works. Here's what's gonna happen. Here's what we're gonna do when we're out.
Yeah.
And it's only $70. I bought two, and out the door we went. Felt great about it.
Right.
Probably got hosed, but it didn't matter.
Right.
Because she made me feel good.
That's funny.
Yeah.
And then you talked to her. Have you ever thought about recruiting drivers since she's already?
No, I never. No, didn't bring that up. Didn't bring that up.
Yeah. But it's funny because the proper presentation stage, in a sense, it really you could almost say it's like the closing stage, because to a degree, because it is covering all the things where basically by the time if the person does it correctly, by the time they get to that point, you're almost boxed in where it's like there's nothing I can say, but that's the right answer.
But no, your point's well taken.
Yeah.
Okay. What you're basically saying is, if I qualify properly and I give a proper presentation, then there is no closing.
Yeah.
And 99% of the time, you're right.
Yeah.
There is no closing. He closed himself.
Yeah.
It's over. That's why he'll ask the lame thing like, "What do I got to do now?"
Sure.
Which that's not lame. That's good.
No. That's good.
Or he may say, the famous, and we'll get into that, closing questions and whatever. He may give you the age-old lame excuse, "I got to talk to my wife."
Yeah.
Well, we know how important that is.
Yeah.
Okay? Especially for a truck driver.
Right.
But the issue, is that, that's pretty much what you see.
Right. It's funny because I would probably critique myself on these first two, maybe not using this exact terminology, but I would critique myself as a recruiter. I would know how good of a job I did with the driver on that front end if we reached that point where the driver said, "What's the next thing we got to do?"
Well, let's do this. Let's talk about what a proper presentation is.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you know what the end result is. I know what the end result is.
Right.
But a new person that's only been doing this for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or whatever.
Sure.
That hires a driver here and there or whatever every now and then. They may not know.
Right.
They may not know that when this guy asked this question at this certain time, we screwed up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, that question would have never come up.
Right.
Okay. They don't know that.
Yep.
Okay. All they know is, why did this happen? But they don't have the answer why. Okay.
Right.
So we're going to qualify properly first. We talked about that last week. Okay.
Yep.
So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to give a proper presentation. Okay.
Sure.
And the age-old question I've always had everybody ask me is, what does proper presentation mean? What makes it proper?
Right.
Well, what makes it proper is this. Okay. And this goes back to what you're saying on closing.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the way I've always looked at it. Okay. Closing a driver. Okay, or a proper presentation. If I give that guy all the information he needs to know in order for him to do what I want him to do, that's a proper presentation, that's closing.
Yep.
So let me say it one more time.
Yep.
Okay? He has all the information that he needs to know. Okay? The key with a proper presentation after properly qualifying is giving him the information that he needs to know in order for him to do what you want him to do.
Right.
And the only way to look at this, is what does a truck driver need to know if he's going to change jobs?
Sure.
That's a proper presentation.
Sure.
And how I first started this, and when I first started hiring drivers, I remember the first day I was ever there, we used to call off these sheets. We didn't have the automatic phone dial thing back then. They'd hand you a sheet. And the first sheet they ever handed to me was in Memphis, Tennessee. And so what I did, I just quickly looked down the dedicated thing that they gave us and the over-the-road thing and whatever, and to see what might be available out of Memphis, Tennessee. Once I had an idea what the jobs were, I started making phone calls. And as I started talking to drivers, and I messed up, I got to thinking about it. And I thought, okay. And when I went home that night, I didn't schedule a guy. I didn't get one guy that day.
Yeah.
That first day, I didn't get one guy. And I'll never forget because I was really kind of disappointed. But I got home that night and I got to thinking about it and I thought, okay, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
What am I doing wrong?
Sure.
Number one, I need to know more about the driver.
Right.
So I started writing down all these questions I wanted to ask the driver. Then I thought, okay, well, if I get the driver and he looks good here, what do I need to be telling him? So I started writing down all the things that I thought I need to tell this guy in order for him to do what I want him to do.
Right.
Okay? So I started writing all that down. then the closing part was just pretty much more of a natural type thing. You know, like you've said before. You know, I truly believe, you know, if you do a proper presentation and you do proper qualifying in the world, there is no closing. Or a person that's never sold anything in their life, teach them to qualify and to give a proper presentation, and they'll be a great recruiter, because they don't have to close, they don't have to have that ability.
That's true.
You know, and you know, so but that's how I did that. I wrote all that down, you know, and then I refined it. You know, like any good recruiter, like you and, you know, and the other guys that I was talking about last week. You know, that's what happens with great recruiters. They take an ideal, they take a concept, and they make it their own, and they make it better. You know, so when I talk about proper qualifying, I could give you the 15 or 20 things that I'm going to tell a driver, okay, that I feel is important for him, but you may look at it and say, well, but we need to add this, and we need to add this, and here's why. And you're probably right. You know,
and that's good stuff, what you're talking about. I think one of the critical things that we talked about in the last series, and, you know, those 14, 15 questions to ask in the pre-qualifying stage, one of them, I mean, they're all critical. One of them would definitely be a major tying in factor here, and that is, you know, what was the problem? And usually, you know, that could be the miles, it could be the home time, it could be where they run.
Qualifying.
And so when we're tying into the presentation, those are some areas that we want to highlight. You know, for example, Joe, you said you hate running the Northeast. You didn't know you were going to run the Northeast region. Well, how would you feel about running the Southwest region? And here's where you'd be able to go. So you tie that in, and it's such a critical piece to him, as you mentioned, what's important to that driver. And he's already told you, he's given you some clues in the pre-qualifying part of it when you ask him, well, what's the problem? What's going on? You know, you're not getting home, you're not getting any miles. What's the deal?
Well, and I, you know, once I've, a lot of times what I'll do when I, you know, and still again, we talked about this a little bit last week also, I believe, you know, about as far as slowing down. Okay? You know, when you start talking to a driver on the phone and you start asking, you know, well, who are you driving for? Well, XYZ. Ooh, good company. You know, how long you been here? 4 years. Ooh, that sounds good too. So you running over the road? What are you doing? Yeah, I'm running over the road. Well, how much you out before you go home? I'm out 8 weeks at a time. Really? And what are they paying you per mile? 32 cents a mile? Boy, this guy sounds real good, don't he?
Oh yeah.
Well, man, that's unreal. Jeez, man. Well, let me ask you something. You know, tell me about your driving record, dude. You know, how many tickets, accidents, anything like that? Oh, I got none. You ever had a DUI? Nah, I don't drink, dude. You know, careless, reckless driving, anything like that? No. License suspension? No. Any kind of criminal history? Hell no. I ain't got none of that, man. I've never been in trouble with the law. Boy, is this the guy you've been looking for all day?
Oh, sure.
Maybe for the last week. You better believe it is.
Sure.
You better slow down now and really get this guy good? Absolutely. You've been waiting all day for this guy to call. You've been waiting all week. Who knows?
Oh, yeah.
You know? So that's why I say, you know, slow down. Slow down. What other questions might we want to ask a guy like this? Well, man, you say you've been out, you know, 2 or 3, 8 weeks at a time. You know, are you married? Yeah, I'm married.
Sure.
You know, well, how does your wife feel about you being gone 8, 9 weeks at a time? Notice how I threw that 9 weeks in versus 8? I always make it sound a little worse. You know, and he'll never pick up on it, but it works. You know, well, anyway, you know, how's your wife feel about you being out that 8, 9, 10 weeks at a time? You know, well, she don't like that at all. I don't blame her. I wouldn't like that either. You know, you said you lived in Dallas, right? Yeah, you told me you lived in Dallas. What did I think when he told me he lived in Dallas? Who do I know that we hire for that's got something good out of Dallas? Well, Arnold does. They got a Southwest Regional. Lisa may have whatever. You know, and I'm just throwing out companies. They're going to have whatever. Okay? I've already got that in my mind. So that when he tells me, well, let me ask you something. You've got a great driving record. You sound like a guy I'm looking for. But so what? I mean, what are you looking to do? If you were going to change something with this company you're with right now, what would you want to change? Well, I want to be home more. Well, you said you're making 32 cents a mile. He told me he's got 4 years at one company. Later on in qualifying, he told me he had 20 years total. What am I going to be able to start him out with if I have him at Arnold Southwest Regional home every weekend?
You're going to be able to start him a lot
36 cents a mile. I already know that. So he tells me, I want to be home more. Well, let me ask you something. What if I could get you home a hell of a lot more? Like maybe every weekend and give you a good raise. How would you like that?
Well, that sounds good, huh? That's what
well, see, but it's because what? Well, we've qualified properly. Okay, now we haven't given him a presentation yet. We've qualified properly. we've asked burning good questions.
Right.
Not being mean.
Right.
We're not being nosy. We're going back and forth here, with the driver, and the guy is eating up what you're saying.
Sure.
He feels at this point that you have his best interest at heart.
Right.
And you're going to satisfy those needs that he needs.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to do whatever you want him to do. Now all you got to do is give him the proper presentation. Because basically he's already closed.
Right.
He's already closed.
Sure.
When I ask him, how would you like to be home more? Like every weekend. Oh yeah, I'd like that.
Yeah.
How would you like to get a raise? Well, I'd like that. He's closed.
Right.
He closed.
Yeah, very
He's done.
true. Very true. And you hit on some key points there. The thing I remember, even when you first started this, when you transitioned from the other company you were at and you started doing this, I've always been so impressed. Number one, you got an incredible memory, but you're able to look at the bullets on a company. You're able to look at the areas they run, the miles, the type of equipment they're in, where their orientation is, how much that pays, how much, pay per experience, all those things. And I could see, even when we sat down and I hand you one of those sheets, you're already in your mind putting together, how would I present
How would I sell this
to a driver?
Right.
How would I do a presentation on this?
Right.
And so the point I'm getting at is if you can do one effective presentation with one company, you can use the exact same framework.
That's right.
To do it.
That's right. You're just plugging in the different numbers and the different locations and so on. But you've hit on a good point, and maybe this is not the time to talk about this. It could be step 5.
Yeah.
Because we've never talked about product knowledge.
Right.
Right. When you're with one company, like the company we were with and so on, it's pretty easy to come up with product knowledge because you're only selling one company.
Mm-hmm.
They run regional, they run dedicated. You got the dedicated list. They run over the road. Well, what's that? Well, they got lease purchase and they got owner operator. I mean,
right.
Well, we got all that with all the companies.
Right.
So it can make it very difficult to.
4 or 5 companies, and that's a good thing for especially newer recruiters. Is I would suggest even starting out, take 1 or 2, maybe 3 max, but first master 1. You might take 1 and apply all the things we're talking about. How to pre-qualify a guy, being able to do a proper presentation.
Well, yeah, and
product knowledge.
Right, and exactly. I know a lot of these guys that went to through the company that we had probably have this already at home.
Yeah.
That was given to them when they went through
training.
Yeah, with that company. Okay. And they probably have it at home.
Right.
What are the 13, 14 qualifying questions that you must ask?
Yeah.
And then like I said before, there may be 20 others, but you got to ask these.
Sure.
What is a proper presentation and what does that entail? Write it all out.
Yeah.
Write it all out. And don't stop, or go back and forth with the driver and discuss things, until you get it all out.
Right.
Because if you think you're done and that guy is asking you, does the company have benefits? Mm-hmm. Or if you think you're done and the guy says, where do I run and where don't I run?
Right.
Or if you think you're done and the guy says, well, how am I paid?
Right.
Then you need to go back and look at what you're doing.
Sure.
Okay? And under proper presentation. Or, let me put it a better way. You go through what you think is proper qualifying, proper presentation. You start selling a company, and only to find out that later on the guy, when you call him into whatever company you put him through, the guy's got a felony.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? You need to stop and look at that driver and go back to see what you're doing to where you missed that guy had a felony.
Right.
Where in your qualifying did you fail to find that out?
Sure.
Now, did the guy lie to you? It can happen. Happens to all of us.
Sure.
Okay? No, I don't have a felony. Mm-hmm. Well, you can't do anything about that. Or did you forget to ask?
Yeah.
Okay? Or during your proper presentation, you're selling him on a company that never gets him home every weekend.
Right.
They don't have anything like that.
Yeah.
Where in their qualifying, did you fail to find out what this guy really wanted?
Sure.
What's going to turn him on? What's going to sell him on what you need to know?
Sure.
So still again, what you're
talking
about
in the proper presentation stage to help a recruiter be as effective as they can possibly be. What would you say, recapping what we've talked about? They've got to do.
Well, it's still again. I think what I would do is if you don't have the proper presentation questions, a guideline for where you want to go with a proper presentation, the things that you want to tell the driver, in order to make it a proper presentation, I would suggest you sit down and write out every single thing that you think is, but you don't have to do all of them, but I'd say 2 or 3.
Sure.
Okay? Write down everything that you feel that is important in order to tell this driver. You will all of a sudden have your 10, 12, 14, 15 bullet points, that you're going to tell this guy about these companies, this particular company and this particular job, that will make it a proper presentation. But here's the key with it. Once you've got that down, you're going to find that at the end of that, you're going to have drivers that will close themselves.
Yeah.
You're going to have drivers that are not going to be asking you questions, okay, that should have been answered.
Right.
Should have been gone over with when you were doing a proper presentation.
Right.
At the end of a proper presentation, if you qualified right and you did a proper presentation, he should be closing at that point.
Sure.
Okay? That's what it all boils down to. We're going to talk about closing next time.
Yep.
What if he doesn't? What are we going to do? How are we going to say? Where we're going to go? Okay, we're going to talk about some of that. But the main thing is that if we do everything right on the first 2 steps, that's going to make the 3rd step a no-brainer.
Sure.
So, how do you know if you give a proper presentation? How many questions did he ask?
Yeah.
But the key is this. If you don't give him a proper presentation, even if everything seems like it goes great, 5 hours later he's driving down the highway, and what's he doing?
Well, he's forgot about you.
He's thinking.
He's thinking, but
he does his best thinking running down the highway, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Just like you do.
Yeah.
Just like I do.
Yep.
I do my best thinking when I'm driving down the highway going long distance.
Yep.
I'm thinking about everything in the world. Don't mean nothing.
Yep.
And all of a sudden he starts thinking, that guy never told me what kind of a tractor I'm going to drive.
Right.
He never told me if it was an automatic or stick shift.
Yeah.
He never told me that it was a year old or 3 years old.
Yeah.
You know why he didn't tell me? Because they give all the new guys them 12-year-old beater cab overs, dude.
Yeah, that's right.
Guess what?
His imagination.
I ain't going there. I'm not going there. Now, is it true? No, it's not true.
Yeah.
But how does he know?
Yeah.
He doesn't. And what does your mind do?
Sure.
You start making stuff up. If you don't have the information, you make it up.
You start filling in the gaps.
Exactly. So that's what happens when you don't give a proper presentation.
Right.
Even if the guy closed, even if you got an application on him, that could happen to you.
Right.
So that's why proper presentation. There's all sorts of reasons why it's great to give a good one.
Sure.
Okay? And we could go on and on and on forever and a day.
Right.
Just like qualifying. Why is it so important to qualify?
Sure.
We could go on and on and on. I mean, I can't even, there's a million things we could talk about.
Yeah.
Same way for proper. If you're listening to this tape, that you have the desire to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay? And if that's the case, then you have the product knowledge.
Right.
And if you don't have it, you're obtaining it right now.
Yeah.
When we're done, you're looking at these companies. You're learning the things that you need to know.
Yep.
Okay? Otherwise, don't get involved in the rest of the steps.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. Good.